a resident of Down East Maine and the program director and business advisor for the Coastal Enterprises, Inc., or CEI's Business Center. She works to provide support and guidance to women starting or growing a business in rural Maine with the goal of encouraging shared posterity, environmentally sustainable projects, and good jobs for all. And I personally, when I read the description of this, was struck by the way we could incorporate mindfulness into our practices as artists or makers and stay true to ourselves and follow that intuition while also being a successful business. So I'm really excited. Thank you, Ruth.
Yeah, thank you. Are we good with the sound and everyone can hear? I'm not used to wearing a mic, so tell me if I start speaking too loudly, because I'm used to having to do that without a mic, so this is a treat. Welcome, and welcome to Familiar Faces. So you're going to hear a teeny bit of repetitiveness. Sorry about that, but you can join in. If you can sit at one of the tables with the papers, unless if you're distancing for any particular reason, I get that. We are still dealing with COVID issues, I understand that. So as I kind of came clean in the session just before, this is the first time in 3 years I'm getting to work with a live audience, not on Zoom. So bear with me, but I think it's coming back to me, how we deal with human-to-human interactions. The first thing I usually do, and again, apologies to those who were just with me before, but I always like to do a land acknowledgement. Anywhere you came from in Maine today, we want to give homage and recognition to those that came before. So the Penobscot, Passamaquoddy, Maliseet, and Micmac. I usually start off my first Friday sessions on Zoom doing that, and I say, it's also a moment to think about what brought you to this moment today. So if there are significant folks in your past or in your current life, it's a moment to think about that too. Maybe artists or teachers or family members who impacted or influenced you to get where you are today. So we'll take a moment, 20 seconds, just to think about that. Maybe, can we close the door? Great. There will be no slides, and hopefully there will be some creative juices flowing. So the large paper is there for you to explore and create as you so feel or get inspired. There are markers, there are colored pencils, but there also are going to be a few worksheets that I'm going to hand out more as a guide than something you actually are going to work on. So almost more as a takeaway. You could certainly use the flip side of the papers, but feel free. I often facilitate, or in the past I have facilitated, something called World Cafe. I don't know if any of you have ever done a World Cafe, but usually we cover the tables with these big pages so that in your conversations, your table conversations, you can scribble, you can take notes, you can throw them in the bonfire later, but it's a way to just, we are a group of artists and makers here, so create and make what you will during conversations this morning. Let me just grab my water. I had one. I realized talking live dries your mouth more somehow. Maybe because I'm trying to project more. So why do I call it minding your own business? I don't know if that's what we technically called it today, but this is sort of a 75-minute example of what I do in a session that I do call minding your own business. I spoke just previously in the last workshop about how, especially as artists and makers, but really any solopreneur, is spending a lot of time solo. So first of all, how many of us really take the time to go within and think about ourselves and our businesses. So hopefully this is some time to do that, and some time to connect, because you also typically don't get a chance to do that. When we started talking, so typically when I do this over like 4 to 6 sessions, mind you, and we're cramming this into 75 minutes, we base it on, I didn't even see our youngest little attendee. No wonder you're over there. Okay, great. Too young for artistic implements, or maybe not. So usually when we do this over the course of a couple of sessions, we leave with at least, I like to say, a draft of a business plan. I haven't scared anyone yet. And the piece of the business plan that Lisa seemed to be most interested in, who helped bring me here today and coordinate things, was all of that. I think she put it in the write-up: the anxiety, the fears, the not wanting to plan about future, and really building your business around what I would call either some milestones. There's all kinds of jargon these days. Key indicators, measurements. I just talked in the other workshop about, you get what you measure, but if you don't take the time to identify what it is you want to measure, it's kind of like, if you don't know where you're going, then you'll get there, maybe, or you won't. So really thinking about whether it's from the purely creative side of things, like I haven't created this yet, and I'd really like to work on that, or expressing myself through art. It could be, I need to make at least whatever the number is, right? 50,000, 100,000, 10,000, but I need to make X number of dollars so I can survive next year. So how am I going to do that? So without taking a huge deep dive into numbers, don't worry, we're not going to get out spreadsheets, we're not going to, but we are going to at least wrap our heads around some of what is a meaningful measurement to you. Questions so far? Is everybody in the right room, or do you want to go find another workshop? Okay. Again, I want to be careful about time, but I realized it was helpful for me to just get a sense of what kind of medium you all work in, and maybe for you to all get to know each other. So if we could just do like name and what your medium is, and if it's several, you can let us know. I'm Ruth. Well, my medium is business advising, right? So should I say something about what we do with the Women's Business Center? Okay, so mine will be a little bit lengthy. So Coastal Enterprises, Inc., you kind of gave a good general introduction. One of the oldest community development, financial organizations in the country, but started in Maine, still in Maine, Maine-based. We approach prosperity, shared wealth, business development on many different levels in CEI, and one of those is the business centers, and specifically I'm with the Women's Business Center, and some of you already heard our why of why we exist, right, is because we believe that not just men but also women, and especially helping women to own and run businesses, helps everybody, helps the world, right? So not to get too far down that road, but that's why we exist. So my medium, getting back to introductions, Ruth, I'm the program director, the Women's Business Center, but artistically, mostly fiber arts, and I would say upcycled creations. Not professionally, but my aspiration. So could we just quickly maybe start here, go around, name, and whatever, your top 2 or 3 mediums are. How's that?
Name's Chaya. I'm a jeweler goldsmith, and Sarah Hires. I am a illustrator, graphic designer. So I do a lot of digital drawing and then produce that on physical products.
Nikki Rydell. I am an acrylic artist. I do modern realism, wildlife, mainly wildlife, pets, horses.
I'm Alice Seeger. I own Belfast Fiber Arts. I'm a weaver, and and we do consignment, so I facilitate other fiber artists, teacher, and my current interest is slow fashion.
Mm.
Tina Ellis. Anything I've been interested in over the years, but currently focusing on painting, watercolor.
Watercolor?
Carrie Ellis, her sister-in-law, and I take pebbles and sea glass and driftwood and seaweed and make pictures, and I'm learning watercolor as well.
I'm Christian, and I don't have a craft in particular, even though I have tried a lot. I'm actually interested to create a community of craft makers who would offer classes to people. So that's what
Great.
I'm Dan Headley, and I'm a performance artist and photographer, and I play around with lots of different things.
Kathy Ayers, and I make jewelry, and mostly from recycled copper, and I make button jewelry too.
Hmm.
I'm Kathy, and I'm a jeweler, silversmith, and I'm also opening a mom-made children's store online mostly, and so I do velvet for that, needle velvet stuff.
Jeff Ellen, make pottery.
Great. How about over at this table?
I'm Susan, illustrator, painter, former graphic designer, and I have all kinds of interests too. I also do printmaking, lino cut, copper handling, etching, and I love copper handling, fine and all that stuff too. But there's only
Great.
so much time in the day.
Yep. Yep.
Or your life.
I'm Elizabeth Miller. I have Paris Houseworks and North Atlantic Fiber Arts, and my primary medium is traditional rug cooking in a more contemporary style, but traditional rug cooking that I teach.
Cool.
I'm Heather Daggett. I work for Paris Houseworks.
Okay. Did we do this?
Mary McRae. I'm an illustrator. I'm Sarah, digital illustration, make cards and art prints.
My name is Linda Perry. I'm a fiber artist. I specialize in knitting and dyeing, and I specialize in indigo dyeing. I have a small shop in Damariscotta, and I also do some writing on the side.
Nice. Good. So it feels like we have a good cross, losing my words. Yeah. But anyway, a good variety here in the room. Good. So what are some reasons why you chose this workshop? I just want to make sure I kind of hit on the high bullet points. Yeah.
Personally, for me, I feel like I just don't know how to narrow down who I'm selling to, what I'm selling, those kind of fundamental things on the business plan. I just like to create art that makes people happy, but how do I make money to do that?
The $60,000 question, right? Yeah, no, that's great. And that reminds me, in case so I don't forget, I did bring business cards. We also have rack cards on the business center, as well as something that we launched during COVID actually called the Women's Business List. And I'm happy to talk about all of that. But lots of free resources on our website. And I'm not supposed to promote it because we're kind of backed up right now, but plenty of one-on-one advising. So you can take that rack card and sign up for some of the webinars that are exactly about what you're talking about. I'm not here to do a commercial, but I'm here to help. And I just want to let you know there's help out there. Anyone else? Yeah.
My business plan had everything but the kitchen sink when I started. And I opened my doors 6 months before the pandemic. So it's been kind of a continual process of climbing out of the black hole. I have to
decide what's growing fruit, what's not, whether, if it's not, will it ever? So
Mhm.
I'm in the process of re-evaluating.
Good, good. Well, hopefully this is timely. Yeah.
Somewhat similar. However, I've been full-time for 15 years. And I'm also in some transition between, from starting out as like a production jeweler in wholesale and lots of craft shows, et cetera, and being more in my own location and having people come to me doing more one-on-one projects that take longer instead of cranking out. So like just narrowing in the focus, but also having some new financial goals for the business, growth goals, and also realizing, wow, okay, how do I kind of prioritize my time? What makes most sense? I know I'm not the type of person that can do like an hour of this and an hour of that and an hour of this and an hour of that. Like I need to get into a rhythm and a mode where the focus happens for durations of time. So how does that happen without stuff getting forgotten over here? And I come from a family of engineers, so income statements and spreadsheets don't intimidate me at all. But also looking at them, I have a real picture of, not being a superhero. So what does that mean for my business moving forward to accomplish the goals
Yeah.
that I want?
Yeah. Were you just in the other session with me? Okay. So doing that like time flow might be a good exercise. I'm just saying. Yeah. Yep. Good. Yeah. One or two more.
I had a career for 45 years that I thought was demanding then. I'm retired now, senior citizen. So I thought I would do my hobby as kind of an entrepreneurial thing. Well, I'm working much harder now, 15-hour days and dealing with all sorts of.
You have a shop, right? Not just an artist, but a shop. Yeah.
So now when I read the description, I said, I'm going to really find a focus
Yep.
here that's going to be the balance.
Yep. Good. 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 Any other burning thoughts, comments about why you're here? Yeah.
I'm 64 and I'm carrying on, when I opened my doors, I took on a 75-year tradition with the request to carry it on, and that's what I'm doing. But I'm 64 and I'm beginning to wonder now if there's going to be another generation that's going to come in and take it from me. And that's not a given by any stretch of the imagination. But if it is, how do I go about that?
Yeah. Yep. You have to get to a point where you have a sense of, well, what is the value of the business? So that it's not just someone coming in because they're passionate about producing whatever it is you're producing, but pots, right? Pottery. But also for them to know, is this viable? Is it sustainable? Is it worthwhile? Not just that they enjoy throwing pots. So I don't, hopefully that came out right, right? I mean, you love what you do. Yeah, and customers obviously love what you do, but in a sense, it's business valuation, right? It's figuring out
It's business value.
what's the what here.
It's also an appreciation of the fact that this is a long-standing
Yeah.
tradition that doesn't want to change significantly.
Mm.
And who just graduated from Alfred University and has their own creative ideas, want to come in here and make something that's been getting made for, it's less disposed to an artist or an art potter who wants to do one-off pieces versus a craftsperson who
Mhm.
wants to continue to manufacture.
Mhm.
And we just had a pottery very close to me with the same kind of tradition that had to close its doors because they couldn't find anybody that wanted to take it over.
Yeah. Well, that's why we say it's important to remember, and we've started actually articulating this more often, that it's not just helping women who want to design, launch, grow their business, but it's also that exit strategy. A lot of people say, and I think rightly so, when you do your business plan or when you're doing your business strategizing, before you even open, believe it or not, you want to be thinking about what's that exit strategy, what's the legacy that you're building. for the next person. So important, and I know that's tough, but it's important. So I call this minding your own business because I do try and bring some mindfulness. It's hard to do a whole lot of it in 75 minutes when we do it over several sessions. We always try and build in like some personal self-reflection questions in between sessions and really getting you to kind of dive a little bit deeper to think about, we just came from the workshop just before this we called the why, right? The why, how, and what of your business. In a sense, this is taking it to the next level and thinking about some of those measurements, some of those goals, some of those next steps, right? What are the things maybe it's time to like shed, and what are those things that I want to cultivate even more? So I'm using a lot of nature lingo here, which is a way for me to segue. I do have some worksheets that I'm going to share, but I'm going to explain them first. And just know, 2 reminders. We might do a little bit of kind of table conversation work, and we'll do some other sharing in a large group. So I always try and remind people. I should test those people who just came from the other session. But it's about taking space and making space. So sharing your thoughts, but also trying to make sure that you're also an active listener and letting your conversation partners also have their say. And then confidentiality, right? Even though it's only 75-minute session, we might get to the point where we do want to share, especially business planning and measurements and how do you plan for the future. We might touch on things that are sensitive or vulnerable. So what happens in the conference room at the Hutchinson Center stays in the conference room at the Hutchinson Center, if that's okay with everyone. So let's, if we can, I'll start these on this end maybe, and you can share here. So I did some double-sided, believe it or not. I tried to be conservative with with paper, but I am going to toss around some markers, and you should feel free to get as creative as you do or don't want to get. So what I'm passing out is possibly, oh, that's not a great one, is from a website that might be a helpful resource. It's been helpful to me. It's called The Creative Independent. Does anyone know it? Familiar? Yeah? Love it. Love it. Yep. So it's particularly, there's also another one, and I apologize, I didn't exactly come up with a resource sheet for you today. There's another one on creative women out of Australia, actually. But I love it because for me, there are resources, there's ways, tools and resources to be thinking in a creative way about business planning. When I came to the Women's Business Center, and we still today, and you'll see it, because eventually we're going to segue over to something a little bit more traditional, but I'm going to show you a couple of different variations on business planning. We're going to focus in, eventually today, before we finish, on milestones or measurements, right? But I felt like we can't just jump right into that. So we're going to do a little bit of warm up, and then we'll do our HIIT workout where we really dive in and do a little bit more intensity around milestones and measurements. But I thought this would get us kind of easing into it. What I started to say was when I came to the Women's Business Center, there's a recipe to business planning. I don't care if you go kind of all natural, which I'll talk about in a minute, or I have another sample of an artist's business plan. But a business plan is a business plan, right? So it has you talking about the organization of your business, the what you produce, the service or product, how you're going to do that, who's your target customer, your market, what's the market research tell you, and of course, a business plan is going to give you an opportunity to talk about like why now, why you, right? Why are you the best person to be doing this business? Which obviously we all feel comfortable talking about ourselves in that way, but you know, you get over it after you do it a little bit, right? But that's a good reason to think about your why. Like, why am I the best person to be doing this right now? A business plan is obviously helpful if you're thinking about financing, if you need to even crowdsource, being able to tell your story. And I always say to folks, a business plan is telling your business story. You need to do that in a narrative kind of way, so words usually, maybe some photos, and you need to tell it in numbers. And those two stories, ways of telling the story, obviously have to be in sync, right? So if you're talking about being open, you know, 7 days a week and hosting all these classes or selling overseas, I mean, whatever your business story is, your numbers of like projecting how am I going to get that done and what's it going to cost me and what's my revenue? Money in, money out. It's a simple story, right? But it can get pretty involved. So your money in, money out, how's the cash flow looking, has to match what you're talking about, right, in your narrative. So that's about as detailed as I'm going to get. I'm happy to talk to anyone about like how you crunch down even deeper than that. So let me move to the sheets that you have in front of you. So this is off of the Creative Independent. I refer to it a lot and use it in the Minding Your Own Business as one sample, one way. For some people, it's a beautiful, colorful watercolor when you see it online. But I just did old black and white. So I'm looking at the side that has business plan in the middle. Right? And we'll get to the other side. So this is, in some ways, the opposite of just a narrative. The elements of a business plan that I just went over with you, you know, that's what this structure is. Right? So you have the business plan in the center. Essentially, you have like your management, your HR, your development. It might be hard to see. I encourage you to look at it online. But these are the basic elements. And this is going to warm us up to like those measurements and milestones. On the flip side, where the leaves are, just all the different leaves, this is sort of a very visual way of what's called, often referred to as a business model canvas. I just hate like the sound of that, but I have to say, maybe I've been around the block a little too long. It's like, didn't we just used to call that like a simple business plan? Anyway, a business model canvas. But of course, I like this because it's nature. You can Google business model canvas and you'll come up with this very like boxy one-pager. It's a one-pager, so that's cool. It's a good first step. It doesn't work for my right brain. It just doesn't flow for me, so I love this leaf sample. So what I was going to do was, but it does have like everything you'll see if you Google it and you find that boxy one-page version. These are the same words you would find there. So things like, what are your key activities, right? So what is it you do? What do you make? What do you send out to the world? Your value, again, very jargony. Apologies to anyone who's a fan. I am not. But your value proposition in back in my day, we just used to call that like, you know, what's the value of what you do? Like, why is your thing, your product, your service, what value do you bring to your customers because of what you produce? There's another one on here somewhere, not customer relation. A lot of newer kinds of business plans will ask you, well, what's the problem? We're going to get to that on the more traditional one. What's the problem you solve? Which I know, especially for makers and artists, is like, you know, you're making beautiful stuff that you enjoy making. So what's the problem, right? Well, you know, don't get too tied up in like the jargon, the words, right? It's like, what joy do you bring to the world? What joy do you bring to your customers? Why would they ever want whatever it is you're offering? So you can kind of think of it that way. Cost structures, revenue streams, again, that's another way of just saying money in, money out. Like, how does that happen in your business? So, I want to be mindful of time. I know that wasn't a whole lot of lead up, but what I wanted to do was give you a little bit of time, a few minutes on your own, but then maybe like conversation at the table, using the big pages if that's what you want to do, if you just want to doodle, but to begin making notes about what are some of the basic elements. And you could use either side as like your guide, and you could certainly make notes just on here. You can make notes on the big pages. But I was going to say, why don't we at least take let's take 2 quiet minutes on your own. And I do have my singing bowl here, for those of you who didn't get to hear it in the other session. So after 2 minutes, you'll hear the bell, you'll hear the bowl, and then maybe a little bit of sharing at the table with what you came up with. And again, I would focus on either side, but I would focus on what it is you're producing or putting out to the world. And if you could start to think about, like, who are your customers? Maybe who typically buys from you, who doesn't, and you would like to find them because you think that would be a great market, a great customer segment. But if you can begin, if all you focus on is that, and the 2 bottom leaves on this side, or on the other side, it's on the side here where it says sales and inventory. Essentially, what I want you to focus on is the money in, money out part. So of what you do, of whatever you create, whatever you're putting out to the world, roughly, this is, you know, back of the envelope, just a couple of minutes, but what do you think that's costing you? And what do you think the revenue from that is? So again, this is just a quick exercise, so you could do it annually, you could do it piece by piece, you could do it according to the month, whatever comes most naturally to you. And it might just be focusing on that one thing that you produce, just as an example, so you have an example to work with for the next few minutes. But what goes into that, and then what do you see as revenue for that? Questions on that exercise for a moment? Yeah.
So from a cost structure perspective, are you thinking about just the cost of things that go into cost of goods sold, or things like it's my rent and my heat and my gas in my car?
Whatever level you feel most comfortable with, to be honest with you. I would say for now, for just like the next few minutes, why don't you just think about that thing, right? And not even paying yourself yet,
Right.
But we'll get to that. Yeah, do you have a question?
Oh, I don't know what customer segments are. Is that your customer base?
Yeah, but like different types of customers, right? So segments might be, I forget what it is you produce, but yeah. So customer segments might be, you know, we mostly focus on tourists, or we mostly focus on 30 to 55-year-old is a typical customer of ours, or it's mostly women shoppers that tend to buy from us, or yeah. So you could think about different segments. So spend just, you know, 2 to 3 minutes on your own. See what comes up for you. There's no right or wrong here. But thinking about at least just those 2 to 3 areas of focus, right? Basically money in, money out for that one product or service, and maybe your customer segments. Good. You tell me. What came easily, and what felt like a challenge so far? Yeah.
As far as like ideal customer or consumer segments, is that kind of like the same thing?
Yeah.
Yeah. I have a hard time like paring it down. It seems like a lot of different aspects, but it's all I can't let go of the different qualities that I see in my ideal customer. Do you want me to give an example?
Sure.
Like my list, I mean, it could just like go on and on. I'm thinking I've got 2 very different businesses, so I'm just giving the new business that I'm just starting.
Yeah. Well, that's hard too. So you do want to focus in on one at a time,
Yeah,
at least. Yeah.
otherwise it's 2 very different ideal customers. But so this is an online children's store. So you know, people that are buying from that are you know, it's all mom-made stuff. So obviously moms, but then also like people who love babies or little ones. So that's like anyone mostly. I mean, you know. But then the qualities that I'm like kind of the value in the business is that everything is handmade. So it's like the quality of the materials, everything is natural materials. So it's like someone that appreciates eco-friendly, ethically made, you know, safe for baby, developmentally appropriate. It's, you know, I don't know, it just feels like it's a lot of things.
But I think you're on the right track. I mean, a lot of what you just mentioned would be part of your value proposition if you were, you know. Yeah, so just as you dive deeper in, you'll get there. Yeah, good. That's a good start. Yeah. Anyone else? I can't believe you put me right before lunch. Worst time. Anyway, everyone's hungry now, I know. Yes. Yeah.
I was just trying to kind of, it was easy enough to figure out where current money is coming in, you know, and focusing on, okay, I make a decent amount selling online, for example, but I really want to establish in-person connections with local main shops. And I think that that's really where things are going to hit and take off, but it's not currently where the money's coming in.
Right.
So it was kind of hard for me to navigate, okay, I see myself making money doing this, but I haven't done it yet. So I don't know if there's...
But there's the operative word, plan, right? Like that's your plan. And that's why when we do actually get to that point where we help people with like financial projections, I mean, even if you're just doing back of the envelope, basic, you're doing like your best guesstimation of, you know, you have to do a little bit of legwork and research, but if you have in mind, for instance, like shops that you want to connect with, well, and this is a good segue into milestones because we're going there next, but you're projecting, that's exactly what those financial projections are, of what could be, what is likely to be if, you know, I reach out to 10 shops between this time next year, might I get 2 or 3 in the door that I want to work with. So, and it's, we always say when we're doing business planning with folks, you don't want to think of like, pie in the sky, best possible scenario. You don't want to think of the worst day of business either. So somewhere in between, right? So if I reach out to 10, maybe I'll be lucky if I end up with 1 or 2 new wholesale clients, right? Anyone else want to share what came up in trying to do a little bit of that? Yeah.
The money's all going out.
The big suck.
I'm currently working, so my projection is several years from now. And
Okay.
I'm a budget analyst and controller, know how to do all the budgeting and setting goals and everything's going out right now, so.
Okay.
It's okay, I can't identify who my customer is because I've never sold art. So it's different from, say, you want a fiber arts business where you did have a product, sell online and all that. So identifying the customers can be very, very challenging. I don't know why people buy arts. I think it's a very personal choice.
But going back to, that great example of the valuation, like what does, I would say what, your unique or particular product or service, and being able to explain it, that does set it apart a little differently, right? And it's a little bit of your why, and being able to sell that why. This is from the earlier workshop that we just came from. That it's, what is it, the saying? People don't really buy what you sell. They buy why you do it and what you're about, right? Like you as customers, right? Doesn't it make a whole lot of difference if you read something about a product that like speaks to you because, it's all handmade, or it's all environmentally sound, or like whatever the reasoning is behind it is kind of what is the tipping point for like, that's why I want to buy that pot, because he talked about it this way, or this is what's important to him. So, yeah, good. Anyone else before we move on?
Any tidbits of wholesale versus retail or direct to customer?
In terms of what? Just the differences or the focus or?
From a planning perspective.
I think it's, kind of to speak to what you both brought up, wholesale can be great. I think you have to look at the whole picture of wholesale and think about, well, what does that mean? First of all, is that worth it? For whatever I put out there in the world, right? Pricing structure. I still need to like feed my family and whatever, pay my mortgage, pay my car loan. So and I go through this currently, like with a bunch of clients are coming to mind right now. So let's talk about what wholesale really is. And there are some formulas and some basic ways of thinking about it. So I don't think it's that wholesale versus retail is better or worse. It's looking at how are you going to get that customer, whether they're retail or wholesale? How much energy, how much effort, and then what's the payoff? So I don't know that really answered, but it's helping. At least what I do is help folks to think about being realistic about what is the cost-benefit analysis, basically, right? And that can be different for every business, every product, wholesale can be great as long as it's coming in and you have those clients, but for some businesses, that's hard to find, right? Like the right kind of fit for who would be a wholesale customer. So the age-old answer of wisdom, it depends. Yeah. Good. All right, I do want to be cognizant of time. So that was just to get your feet wet, right? And this is a good takeaway because then that'll be a reminder of the creative independent There's like a ton of resources out there. But this is, just some samples of, and actually this article or this how-to on the site, she does a really good, pretty in-depth, but, relatable. Like, I just liked her approach to how to think about business planning as an artist, as a creative. So we're going to stick with artists, but then segue over to more formal. I don't know if it makes sense to do both at once. Okay, so I can start at this side and you can start at that side. So the next two that you're going to get, and again, apologies, we're kind of going through this pretty quickly. Let's see, you need 2 more here, you need 2 here. So we're passing out 2 different things. One, they're both business plans. And yes, I am using kind of business plans to get you thinking about the milestones that we're going to talk about in a second. I think there's 3 there. You got both? You got both. Great. More than enough. Oh. Give you ladies some. Yeah. Yeah. Yep. Yep. Oh, I thought you had 2. I'm sorry. 4, 3, 4. Can you just give them 2 if you have enough? Okay. So I know I'm throwing kind of a lot at you all at once in a short time period, but you'll have time to take them home and digest them and think about it all. Sometimes I feel like, oh God, maybe I'm giving people like too many options, too many choices. But I think especially with creatives, big assumption here, we all think differently and we all approach things differently. And so this way you have a couple of different styles of the same thing, right? These are all business plans. Do you have the other?
Plant stuff and the grid.
No, this one too. I'm sorry, I missed you guys. So you have kind of the creative independent that's more kind of nature-based. There's 2 for you. Sorry about that. So here's what I thought we'd spend at least most of the rest of the time on. They both pretty much, like I said, there's a recipe, right? Any business plan is going to ask you some of these basics. And let me just grab one so I'm looking at both for you. Obviously, none of these have a wonderful Excel spreadsheet that goes along with it. Because like I said, the other part of the narrative, so whichever one of these 3 options you take a look at or decide to use, and again, important to do just for yourself. Why would you do a business plan just for yourself? Why put yourself through all that? Yeah. Thank you. What else? Any other reason? Miles. Excuse me.
Keep you on track.
It's your map. Excuse me. Go ahead.
I always say that there are actually 2. There's the one you show the bank when you need money. And there's the one that you use to run your business on a day-by-day basis.
Right.
The first one just has to be credible. How are you going to pay it back? And it needs to be credible in the bank's eyes, not yours. And the other one is the one that you use to see how you're measuring up to what you told the bank. And it has to be flexible and it has to be able to turn on a dime. You have to be able to respond to the measurements that you take. And so that's when you sit down and say, well, here's what I'm going to do here.
The one other thing I would add, yes to all of that. Yeah.
I was just going to say, for me, just from the first part of what you were saying, figuring out your value added to market to other people and thinking about your customers and who you have and who you want and the values that you want your customer to have. Some of that stuff is stuff I wouldn't have thought
Mm-hmm.
Okay, I can't hold it in any longer.
Okay.
Am I the only one that's having trouble hearing?
Oh,
Yeah,
me or the rest of the group?
I can hear you just fine.
Well, I have
but
the
what
microphone.
I want to hear what other people are saying.
Yes, okay. And I'll try and remember, maybe I can repeat. I've done that a few times, but I'll repeat out what folks are saying. Yes. And it's a big room.
Yes.
I know, yes.
What I've learned about in being
Sorry.
creative is you start because you love it, whatever it is. And you might have multiple interests at the same time, but once people start getting into the business side of it, they don't realize all of the, how you do it, all of the budgeting, the having a bank account, having a relationship with the banker, having customers, having a place to sell it, whether it's online or physical. And I think these workshops are good because it lays that out. Because some people start a business with the joy of making and wanting to share it, not having an iota
Yep.
of what's involved in running a business. And that can take the wind out of your sails.
Welcome to my world.
I like the business side, that's what I do, but trying to make the
Yep.
creative side more important in my life, because it's always been about taking care of other people, you know, being a mom, being
Yep.
a wife.
Yep.
So I do realize the business side of it. So you can make art to sell, or you can make art just to make art because you want to, and you don't have that need. So it's like, I'm trying to decide that too.
Yep. Good. I mean, that's good that you're realizing there are those decisions to make. Speaking of decisions, that's the one thing I would add on that I didn't really hear. So when I say it's kind of your GPS, it's your compass of am I on the right track, it also can help you make better informed decisions, right? So I'll use a very quick example, and then I want to give you time to work on this a little bit. Client of mine with a yarn store who started it really with her own equity, so didn't need a loan, you know, whatever. Very small brick and mortar during COVID, doing well, but I keep asking her, well, how are you doing, right? Like financially. Just moved into, like, tripled her space, big space. And of course I kept asking, you know, like, have you run the numbers? Can you do this? And she is working with an accountant, but like they had an aha moment in looking at like, well, how'd you do last year? Because it's still a pretty new business. Oh, really well, but she realized, the accountant realized I had nowhere accounted for like inventory. Like, how much money do you have sitting on the shelf? Makes a big difference in what your bottom line for the year is, right? So it's, you know, simple fact, but something that, you know, if you're not used to the business side of things or really thinking through, and can I afford to move into a bigger space? Or can I afford to bring in, I don't know, a whole nother new line of whatever it is you're creating? So doing a little bit of those, of the planning also helps to guide you in your decision making. Yeah.
I want to, I'm not going to jump on something here. Being an accountant, I think that it's also important that people make a difference between having an accountant because they have to pay taxes and having an accountant because they need to have a business partner. And where the accountant is a business partner, then they ask the question of how do you make money and do you have an inventory and all that kind of stuff. And I have seen from my clients that one of the big things that people are like, oh yeah, you know, it's like my checkbook, so I know exactly where I am. When in reality, if you don't close your books every single month and you don't take the time to actually look at the numbers every single month, it's like you feel you are driving at 50 miles an hour and you're already at 70 or at 30.
Yeah.
And I think
Good
it's
analogy.
It's
Yeah.
not just, oh, I'm going to make a plan, but it's also looking at, yeah, yeah, your plan was you're going to 3 conferences. Yeah, but you were so tempted by 5 conferences that you spend twice as much money and you're not bringing the revenue because you are busy doing something else. So I think it's good to make plans, but it's also good to actually look at your actual numbers and not wait until the end of the year when you go to your tax accountant.
Right. And
That's mine.
It's also important, people don't know how to read those reports.
yes,
P&L,
I was just going to go there.
And it's very simple if someone simplifies it for you. But if you're just looking at the numbers, it's deer in the headlights.
Right.
People don't.
Absolutely.
Don't understand them and meet with someone to
Yep.
explain it.
Again, welcome to my world. Almost at least a couple of times a week with clients. Yes. And all due respect to accountants, there's a role for accountants and then there's a role for bookkeepers. And so,
That's my side gig.
yeah, oh, is it? Great, good for you.
Share your frustration.
Yeah.
I've got a client who's expanding her business, and I said, do you have a plan for this? Because you're spending all your money on that, but you're making your money over here, and you're losing money.
Yeah.
Stop spending money.
Yeah, and I always encourage clients, you know, to get that bookkeeper, and even if you don't know what all those numbers are, you know, I have a whole list of like, here are the questions to ask a bookkeeper before you even hire a bookkeeper. Even if you don't understand the numbers, then ask that bookkeeper, right? Like, even if it's just quarterly, like, I want, you know, a report, I want you to spend a half an hour with me to explain what that report says, if you're not the person who's going to understand it. Yes, and then we are going to segue.
I think one of the things that's really hard.
Can you hear?
One of the things that's really hard for an artist or a creative person is that you are passionate about what you're in love with what you're doing. Otherwise, like, you don't do it, right? As opposed to corporate America, like they're a business, they're P&L, they're thinking about bottom line. Oh, I didn't make enough money this month, I'm gonna lay off 1,500 people, right? Just to come to the realization of doing something you love and it's not needing the
Yeah.
income, you know, it's like, but this is my passion, but this is a bit, you stink at the business part, right? You're doing great at the passion, but, you know, your business isn't succeeding, and making those hard, like, they're really hard decisions to decide, I'm just not gonna do this I'm either not gonna have the business,
Or I need to
have this
rethink,
product.
right? Yeah,
Yeah, because
realign.
it's
Yeah,
passion.
yep, yep. Yes,
You know, it sounds very straightforward, make a plan, and yes, you don't know where you're going if you didn't find the map, you know, you just set out and you don't know where you're gonna end up, I get that. But the more important thing is to recognize the roadblocks along the way and take alternate routes. And, cause you don't know what you don't know, ever.
right.
And you make your best plan, and then it turns out to be something completely different. So the smart thing is to, not follow the plan anymore, but just go, okay, well, we were planning on going here, but now we have to get there by another
Detour,
route.
yeah, yeah. But being willing and at least paying attention to the detour signs, right? So,
Is the key to success. So I was in real estate for a little while, and one of our teachers said, your success in life is directly related to your ability to formulate plan B, or C or D or E or Z. So, you know, having a plan is important, but you really need to know when it's time to pivot or go a different direction.
right,
or-
adapt, yeah. A million years ago, I was in the food industry, so I always used to say the sign of a great chef is not like whatever they produce on the table, but like when the calamity happens in the kitchen, what do you do? So similarly, right, like at least pay attention so that you can say like, uh-oh, right? Like caution sign, you know, I need to rethink or reconfigure. So very important. Okay, that's the right time. Okay, so we are kind of coming down to measurements and milestones. And so the two other sheets that we distributed are very similar in some ways, but maybe the abundant artist one speaks to you more. I don't know. The more straightforward, more traditional looking one is just a one-pager business plan. The thing they have in common is that they're both business plans with very similar elements. But what I wanted you to be able to do was to spend a couple of minutes thinking and then maybe sharing at your respective tables on the bottom of each. So on the bottom of this one in bold, there is something called milestones. On the bottom of the abundant artist one, towards the bottom, it's 3-month goals, 1-year goals. Whichever one speaks to you, I don't really care. I don't care if you use the back of the page and just come up with your own. That's okay too. The point here, and I'm sorry that Lisa left. I know what was important to Lisa was to get you thinking about measurements and how those measurements have to be meaningful to you. So again, you're doing this because you're passionate, because you love what you're producing, what you're making. It could be bottom line dollars. Like, I know I've got to make X number of dollars and then backwards engineer to what's going to get me there. If I got just 2 big wholesale gigs and whatever I can get for retail customers at this amount of money coming in, I'd be good. Or I don't want to deal with the headache of wholesale. I'm just going, my target market is online retail sales. Whatever that is, you could start from what do I need to make dollar-wise. For today, because we only have a few minutes to do this, it might be, it's got to be meaningful to you, right? So obviously, we're not going through a whole detailed business plan here and now, but to at least get you thinking and articulating, saying it out loud to someone else after a few minutes, is it, for this coming year, or maybe it's just for the next 3 months or 6 months. Maybe it's number of customers. Maybe it's I've never thought about wholesale, so I want to test the waters. It could be number of sales. It could be dollars, right? Like, I know I have to make X amount by the end of the summer. How am I doing that? But to start naming what some of your meaningful milestones might be. So again, it might be on either sheet. It might just be on a blank piece of paper. Again, you're welcome to use the big sheets of paper, but let's spend maybe just 5 minutes, and then you can share out with each other as well. Yeah.
Just got a quick question. So
Sure.
When you're, when you're a maker or a creative or an artist, and you're doing a plan and you are setting your milestones, like, how do you know whether or not, and how do you assess how realistic you're being with yourself? When if you've been in this for a while, you know that it can be a real roller coaster. Like, my business, right after the pandemic happened and everything shut down, we were shipping like crazy. We shipped fiber art, kits, materials, original patterns, all of those things all over the United States. And things were just, we had a lot of activity.
Yeah.
Past 6 months to probably closer to a year, like down
Yep.
here. So it's really hard for me to say, oh, well, like, I'm gonna sell this much and I'm gonna do this and know whether or not that's realistic given these conditions that are cyclical or out of my control.
Well, with any, I would say you're doing your best guesstimate. Cyclical, unknown cyclical, I mean cyclical, but it's based on tourist season is a whole nother thing, right? Right. I mean, in a sense, you're talking about you don't know what you don't know of how it's going to be moving forward. But you could imagine what an ideal might be and then what a plan B might be. So in other words, if you're thinking, well, in the last, 6 months, it's been kind of quiet. But before that, not knowing all the details of your business, so that you could say, well, ideally, we'd love to try and do this much of this kind of sale or this kind of product, or we want a little bit of protection in case we get into another slump. So are there kinds of customers that we don't have right now that maybe we should be thinking about, so that that's kind of our cushion, as it were?
Or like I teach more when the retail is quiet.
Yeah. Yep. Yep. So you have like curriculum waiting in the wings for like 3 or 4 different workshops in case that's what you need to do next winter or something.
Because like in these kinds of businesses, we can't just, like there's no obvious way to scale in some cases because
Right.
we're not making widgets and.
Yep.
Yeah, but at the same time, from what you were saying, as much as the pandemic was an unusual aspect, I think personally, what I have seen in one of those business plans, it's not so much I'm going to increase my sales by 20%, but how are you going to get to those 20%? And you are talking about the craft kit, for instance.
Right.
How do you explain to people how easy it is to do? So maybe it's like, okay, I expect that if I do 3 videos and 2 blog posts, and I can talk to 3 news outlets, then I'm going to create an interest, and that's what is going to get it. So therefore, if I don't do that, then I shouldn't be surprised that I did not increase my sales. And I think that COVID is such, it's like, it's a flop.
Yeah.
You
Yeah,
know,
I
like,
know.
it's just,
Yeah.
as you were saying,
Yeah.
it's a pivot situation versus you just talked about, I know that this is a low season, therefore that's the plan, you have a low season, that's a high season, but you have this high season and you have to produce those kits in advance, but that's the time I'm teaching, how am I going to get that? And I think that's also, I would assume what you had talked about earlier, the why and how you're going to get there,
Yeah.
more
Oh,
than
for
just
sure.
a number. So.
Yeah. And sometimes even blog posts, sometimes they hit.
Oh, yeah,
And
of course.
sometimes they don't. Like I got featured on Maine Cabin Masters. We thought we were gonna have a huge bump. Nothing. Nothing.
Mm.
It's
No, I
really.
agree, yeah.
Yeah. But no.
But you
you're
tried.
right.
But
Yes,
you did
exactly.
you did what your plan was, which is I want to be featured in one of those magazines.
Right.
It didn't work. Okay.
Right.
At least it's not like I expect to increase by myself by 20%. I'm not going to do anything. I'm just hoping I'm going to increase.
Right, and that was sort of my point as well, was like at least thinking about what can I plan that might be able to cushion it, even if it's a slower season. And if we somehow get, like more orders than we can even handle, then obviously that takes a back seat. But kind of like having things in the ready and thinking about, this is sort of, the I guess you want to build realistic, but like best case scenario, or this is what we'd aspire to, right? So these might be your
And then
aspirations.
to his point, you start building the stuff underneath of it to try to.
Sure. Yep. So again, we're winding down here, but just take like a minute or two to think through what some of those goals might be, or some of those measurements. And they have to be meaningful to you, right? And kind of be within your world and realm of possibilities in terms of what could you build out. So just take a minute or two to do that, and then we'll kind of wrap up.
I have some more specific questions.
Sure. Give me a quick idea, and then, because I have to watch the time a little bit, but.
So, the 2 big ones right now, like a lot of the stuff that we're talking about right now, I started to dial in last fall, so I had a pretty good idea of what that looks like, and I'm struggling with, like, I know how many billable hours in a year, so ideally how many billable hours in a week I would work, and how do I, and I'm sort of feeling a tug of war between like the I tend to have a pattern right now where I get the like computer admin stuff and done in the morning when I'm fresh. And sometimes it rolls over into the afternoon. So now that kind of number of hours I would need to have available time. So like, does it make better fiscal sense to prioritize number one revenue all the time? Like maybe the admin stuff does fall behind because I start my day with the money making aspect. And then, you know, if some of the admin gets sacrificed as a result, well, at least I'm getting
Right. I think it's a little bit of both, and it's going to be hard to do this in just like 60 seconds. So take my card, or if there are any of us at the Women's Business Center. I do have a worksheet that might be helpful for you. I'll grab it. You know, it's that age-old like kind of time management of important and urgent.
Well, and the sub-question of that is also like, what are some of the key elements and factors to look for when it comes to be like, okay, it's time to hire.
Well, and that's where I was going to go, is looking at, well, what are the tasks? Who needs to do those tasks? Who doesn't need to do those tasks? So, like, are there some things that you can farm out? Maybe not today, but like, you know, if it gets to be really heavy on the admin, you know, can someone else be doing billing, or can someone else be, you know, whatever your admin stuff is. So it might be worth it. I know a lot of people's reactions are like, I can't afford that. Yeah. But, you know, if it's a part-time person, maybe it's a, you know, whatever, stay-at-home mom, I don't know. But, you know, if it means their 10 hours mean that you could pay them and be making a lot more money doing, you know, the metal work, then, so that's where you have to sort of track a little bit of how much time is it taking you to do all that other admin stuff. Yeah, I don't know if that's helpful. Somewhere I have those other sheets that I can give you. Okay. We have to close, don't we? Yeah. All right. It's that time because everyone's going to be coming in for lunch. So, final wrap up, final questions. You know, not to go all yoga on you, but I live by what one of my favorite yoga teachers used to say, which was, you know, what's your intention? What action are you going to take? And are they in alignment? Right? So intention, action, alignment. And I carry that even into conversations with my business clients. Because again, to your point, it's, you know, what do you want out of this business? What actions are you going to take to try and make that happen? And are those two things in alignment? I don't know if that's helpful. What burning questions are you left with that we didn't answer? Because I'm happy to follow up. But did this at least touch on kind of meaningful measurements for you? And at least now you have the resources, some of those resources. So this was sort of like a tease of a preview, but hopefully left you thinking a little bit and gave you some resources to use. Thank you.
Thank you.